I'm Susan Lauer, Administrator of the Maharishi Vastu Office for North America. Jon Lipman, our National Director for Maharishi Vastu and Chief Vastu Architect here in the US, will be discussing our topic for the event.
I'm Jon Lipman, AIA, and as Susan said, I'm the Director for Maharishi Vastu in North America and the Caribbean. And by the way, people are attending this webinar from the North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And so it's a worldwide webinar, and we're delighted that all of you can join us. And we're going to start right in by asking the question, what is Vastu? Well, a short definition is that Vastu is the design and construction of a house in harmony with natural law. And it comes from a limb of the ancient Vedic tradition, which is the world's most comprehensive and intact and ancient system for the development of our human potential. And the word Veda itself, Veda as it's spelt and Ved as it is commonly pronounced, means knowledge. But what we understand is that what it refers to is the intelligence, the organizing intelligence at the basis of all of nature. And so simply to call that intelligence knowledge is inadequate. And so a better definition is total or complete knowledge. And it contains different qualities, different limbs, and one of them is the total knowledge that organizes the structures of the universe. Well, what are the structures of the universe? The universe is composed of galaxies, solar systems, stars, planets, human physiology, the cells in our body, the molecules, including DNA in the cells and the atoms inside of the molecules. And each of these structures have an architecture, and they exist in perfect balance and harmony internally and within the entire universe. And the word sthapatya, the first word of Sthapatya Ved, has as its root the Sanskrit word sthapan, which is related to the English word establish. And so we can literally translate Sthapatya Ved as the knowledge of establishing. But what it really is the foundation of the architecture principles of the structures of nature. And when we apply appropriate principles of this to the structures that we create, our buildings and our cities, then we say that this quality of balance and harmony within the structure and within the whole universe is being established. And that term in Sanskrit is Vastu. And so as a convention in India, the land of the Ved, homes that are built using this ancient system of eternal knowledge of nature's architecture are called Vastu homes and cities. And the famous Vedic sage Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, so well known for introducing transcendental meditation or TM to the world and bringing out Ayurveda and bringing out Hatha Yoga to millions of people around the world, focused a great deal of his career, about 15 years, on this body of knowledge, the architecture of nature, and how to apply it, how to apply Vastu to the design of buildings and cities. And in so doing, he gave us a practice which is very, very authentic and therefore very, very effective, because the ancient texts tell us that when you design a building according to natural law using Vastu, that you can create influences promoting good health, happiness, family harmony, success, and growth to enlightenment. And this is very important, very valuable. And so he focused for a long time to ensure that the practice that he would bring out would really be fully Vedic and really bring these qualities into people's lives. And so we signify this practice of Vastu that we're talking about by putting Maharishi's name in front of it. And so the full name is Maharishi or Maharishi Vastu Architecture and Planning. So, getting to our lecture topic, what is a harmonious house? Well, what would be a harmonious thing? Well, the dictionary tells us that for something to be harmonious, it should be balanced, it should be friendly, it should be peaceful, it should be pleasant, it should have a warm feeling. And now, what might be the reality when it comes to a home? Well, one reason that we selected this title, Harmony, for this home is because both Susan and I, who of course live in Maharishi Vastu homes, love being in our homes so much, and we're typical, we're not unusual. We love being in our Vastu homes so much that we don't like to even leave them. And both of us now have made arrangements so that we can work a large part of the week from our own homes. And we even cook our meals frequently inside of our home so that we don't have to go out to eat at a restaurant. And trust me, for me, that is a real change in behavior. And so this idea of a harmonious house is very real to Susan and me. And so it's a topic that we wanted to share with you. But let's see now how other people who live in Maharishi Vastu homes describe its quality of harmony as it affects their lives.
You feel this very, very profound stillness that doesn't shift or change. And the nice part of that for my life is the peacefulness that it brings to me and how I feel.
And now we'll hear another.
Anything you do within a Maharishi Stapachivate house has this incredible feeling of silence and sort of this just whole, this sweet quality that underlies everything you do within the structure, whether you're eating, you're playing, you're sleeping, whatever it is you're doing. And so I think that it's that quality that allows for, my whole family to just, enjoy being here and have more happiness, more health.
This harmony that these two speakers and Susan and I experience living in Maharishi Vastu homes, peace at its deepest level, it's a very real thing. And we're today going to talk about the 5 elements that create this profound quality of harmony in a Maharishi Vastu home. The first we call right orientation. That is the direction that our homes face and the direction that we face for primary activities. These 2 aspects of orientation comprise the first of the 5 elements that produce harmony in a Maharishi Vastu home. So how does right orientation produce harmony? Because it's certainly not obvious, and it doesn't seem even likely to us. So let me introduce the subject by asking you a question. And unfortunately, of course, I won't hear your answers, but the question is, why does the sun rise in the east? And the answer is very simple. The Earth is a sphere. It rotates on its axis that runs through the North and South Pole, and it rotates from west to east. And this means that the surface of the Earth rotates constantly from west to east. And actually, at this latitude, we are moving, therefore, our entire lives at about 1,000 miles an hour, about 1,600 kilometers per hour to the east. So that means that east is our direction of travel for our entire life. And because the surface of the Earth is rotating to the east, all of the celestial bodies everything outside of planet Earth appears to pass overhead from east to west. And the sun is the most obvious example and the most important one. And really, everything on the surface of the Earth, directly or indirectly, is as it is because of the life-bestowing qualities of the sun. The sun is the prime natural law that affects our life on planet Earth. And when we face east, because the sun and all the other celestial bodies come at us from the east, when we face east, we are facing the direction of the life-giving force, energy of the sun, etc. And so, in other words, when we face east, we are facing natural law. And in the Vedic literature, it is stated that when you face natural law, the natural law supports you. You are aligning yourself with nature. And this is why the very best direction of sleep, which comprises a third of our day in which we're oriented in a single direction, the very best direction to sleep is head to the east. Now, what I mean by that is the headboard or the pillow should be at the east end of the bed. And when we work or study, the best direction to face, to look, is to the east and secondarily to the north. And so the ancient texts tell us that the direction that we face has an effect upon our life, and medical research is actually bearing this out now, but we'll come to that later. In the meantime, I want to point out that the buildings that we occupy are really, in a way, intermediaries between us and the natural environment, between us and the sun. And so one could speculate in this context that, gee, maybe even the direction which the building I occupy faces might have some impact upon my relationship with nature. And the answer is yes. In fact, the Vedic literature says that the most important influence on our lives from our buildings is the direction that buildings face. And east is wholly nourishing, and north is also. And south-facing buildings are the most negative. They're associated with all problems and suffering. Now, this sounds to some extremely unlikely. It probably sounds like superstition because it is ancient information and could be regarded as superstition, except for the fact that recent published peer-reviewed medical studies have confirmed this ancient guideline. Now, therefore, surprising as it may sound, perhaps the single biggest contributor to making life in a home harmonious is the direction which a building faces, and secondarily, the directions that we face for primary activities such as sleep and work and study. Now, in the next webinar, I will focus deeply on why the direction of east is so significant in our lives. But for more information in the meantime, bear with me while I bring up some visual information. Feel free to go to our website, which is maharishivastu.org, and there click where the red arrow is in the upper left on the button that says, now I have to get my glasses on, what is Vastu? And when you click on that, you get a pull-down menu, and one of the items on it is research. Click on that, and that brings you to a page that gives a very short summary of the notion of research into Vastu, and then click near the bottom on the line that says summary of research. And it will then download onto your machine a PDF of about 10 pages, which will take you through the medical research and site where the research has been published. So that's for those who don't want to wait until the next webinar in which we will go into those things. Now, at this point, I'd like to break and ask whether you have any questions on the subject of right orientation. And perhaps some of you have sent questions in on this subject earlier which Susan already has.
Yes, John, I do have a couple questions on orientation. Let's see, the first one. If your house faces east, but there is a hill preventing the morning sun from hitting your house, is that bad? And why?
One of the qualities of the sun, one of the qualities deriving from the rotation of the earth from east to west, is that there is, the Vedic literature tells us, and many other ancient traditions also, that there is a life-bestowing, a nourishing, a health-giving energy that comes from the east at the time of sunrise, around that time to us. And medical research seems to initially bear this out, which I'll go into on another webinar. And if there's a hill to the east of our home, then we are deprived of that health bestowing quality of energy because it won't pass through a hill. And also it will delay, it will retard sunrise, it will reduce the amount of influence that we get from the sun from the east. And so the premise of that question is correct. We do not encourage anyone to live in a house when there is a hill to the east. And this is the reason why the Maharishi Vastu consultation service, which I direct for North America, always encourages our clients to get in touch with us before they buy a lot that they're going to build on, because then we will work with them remotely, we don't have to travel to it, to assess precisely what the effect of the topography to the east of the site will be, so that we can definitively tell them whether it will be a nourishing site to build on.
Okay, here's a question that just came in from someone who's with us currently on the call. And she says, can you do anything if you live in a house facing south to improve the impact it has on your health and life?
Well, that's a very good question. And the answer is very simple. Most houses have a back door or a side door. And so it may be that the house that you live in has an east door or a north door, which certainly may be less convenient to use. My recommendation to you is to simply stop using the south door and use an east or a north door. In some cases, people who have not had east or north doors have had them built onto their house. And anecdotally, the results that this has made on people's lives is shockingly great. In my own home, when I first got this information, in fact, I lived in a house that faced south, but the back door, the kitchen door, which opened conveniently right onto an alley, faced north, and the front door faced south. I hope that's what I said a minute ago. And so we closed up the front door and put a little sign next to the door telling the postal people to come around to the back. And there was somebody who was living in that house at that time who had a chronic condition. And almost immediately it abated and did not return. And I can tell you other similar stories. Now, such stories are not by any means proof, but they, I hope, are reason enough to encourage you to try these things for yourself.
Okay, here's another one, John. Why is it necessary to be a degree off from east?
We do not recommend being a degree off from east. When we build Maharishi Vastu, we use a surveyor and we do our very best to align new construction precisely to the east. That is, where the sun rises on the September and March equinoxes.
Yes, I think maybe this would be a good time, John, to just make the distinction between true cardinal directions and magnetic compass directions too, because many people don't think of that as being anything different.
That's very wise, Susan. In some parts of the world, magnetic north, as shown on a compass, and true north are the same. But in some parts of the world, they deviate. For instance, the Pacific Northwest of the United States, they differ from each other by over 20 degrees, which is an enormous amount. If you live in Chicago, they're identical. And the drift is corresponding according to the distance you get from certain meridians on the Earth. So using a compass is potentially misleading. And what we're referring to, as Susan intimates, is true solar east. That is the direction where the sunrise is exactly on the equinoxes, March 21st, September 21st. And there are a couple of easy ways to check the orientation of any given house. And that is by going on to any one of the following programs on a computer or a smartphone, and those are Google Maps, Google Earth, or Yahoo Maps, because any of these programs, and probably other similar ones, when you type in your address and a photograph or a map comes up showing your address, it will have due north directly on the top of the screen, and therefore due east is directly on the right-hand side of the screen. So you can easily, by comparing, when you zoom into your house as far as it'll go, by comparing the orientation of the sides of your house to the orientation of the sides of the screen, you can see how close it is to aligning with the true cardinal directions.
Okay, here is here's one more on orientation. There's actually two more. Most modern homes have more glazed or glass windows and doors at the back of the house. This allows more light to enter the home from the back of the house than from the front of the house. Hence, shouldn't homes be facing west, so the back of the house, which allows the most light in, allows most light in from the east?
Light from all four directions is good, is healthful, is normal. And when we build Vastu houses, like all houses, we put windows on all four sides. We do understand that having lots of light coming in from the east is especially nourishing to us. And as a kind of experiment in the house that I live in right now, every room has an east window, and I love it. But once you bring some east light into the house, plenty of it, that's enough. You don't have to worry about more. And so if you have an east-facing house, you have the front door, the door you use to enter it on the east side, and you wish to have lots of windows on the west side because you want to have a view of the backyard, there's absolutely no harm in that.
Okay, and the last question, there's actually two questions that are very similar about orientation. This one, the easiest one, is what about multi-family apartment condo type houses? Do we consider the house entrance or the apartment entrance? And the other question that had come in earlier said very similarly, if the main entrance is facing south, but the residence entrance from the parking is east, does that minimize the negative effects of the main entrance?
And the answer is that what counts as the biggest influence, and I should back up and say that when we actually design a Maharishi Vastu building, apartment building or house or office building, we design several things about the building so that they all agree on the ideal orientation of the house. And it is overwhelmingly east or north oriented. But in an existing building, the only thing that we have any control over is where we come and go. And so we go with that. We recommend that you come and go from a building from the east or from the north. And certainly it's great to encourage other people to as well. And what we understand is that that alone is a good thing. And so it's certainly something worth doing. The direction into which we enter a unit once we're inside of the building is not something of any particular significance. Okay?
Okay, I think we can go on to the next section then, John.
Very good. We're next going to talk about the second of the 5 elements that bring harmony to a house. And that is what we call right placement. And what we mean by that is the following. It means that everything, all the major activities are in the right place in the house. Now, this goes far beyond the wise decluttering advice of Marie Kondo that many of us have run into on Netflix. It's wonderful advice, but we're talking about something which is more profound and which is universal. And let's go into it this way. How many of you, and I won't hear your answers, have ever gotten up at sunrise and gone for a walk as the sun is rising? When I ask that question and I'm able to see the answers, people always nod their heads and they indicate to me that the experience of doing that makes them feel great. Either they feel charged as they do it, or they feel more energy during the day. So there's some experience that is associated with being out in the rising sun. There's a different quality of experience being out under the sun at noon, and another one at sunset when the sun is declining. And so as a summary, we can simply say that the sun has different qualities of energy at different times of the day. Now, that is a law of nature that has to do with the relationship between the sun and life on planet Earth. Is there a way that we can use that law of nature to create more harmony in our homes? And the answer, of course, is yes. The way is that we locate certain key functions in a house, in certain quadrants or sectors of a house, such that a particular quality of the sun's energy will support a particular activity of ours. For example, it's quite likely that many of the people who are connected on this call practice the Transcendental Meditation Technique, or TM, and others of you may practice other meditations. And so many people on this call probably meditate once or twice a day in their own home. Well, it turns out that there is an area of the home where, because of a particular quality of the sun's energy, the quality of silence, of transcendence, is stronger. And therefore, it is sensible, if we meditate at home, to meditate in that corner of the house, because it will support the activity of meditation. Well, where is it? It's in the Northeast. A second example is every house has a kitchen, every apartment has a kitchen, has a stove. Where should we cook? Well, the most common solution in Vastu, though not the only one, is in the Southeast. And why is that? Because one of the qualities of the sun's energies is a quality of transformation. And we understand through Ayurveda, the ancient holistic healthcare system that comes from the Vedic knowledge, that a key to good health is to be able to fully digest our food. And if the food is cooked in the right location in the house, where this quality of transformation is strongest, then it is most conducive to that food being transformable in our alimentary channel, and therefore improving our health. So there are certain places we'll put a stove, therefore a kitchen. Another example is one of the activities we conduct in our house is to be convivial, to socialize with other people. And it turns out that the part of the house, because of the different qualities of the sun's energy, that supports conviviality is on the west side in the center. So that's where we might put, for instance, the living room. So these are some examples of places in a home where, if we place functions, our life becomes more and more successful and smoother. Now, I should mention that there has not yet been, to my knowledge, any medical or statistical research on this premise of Vastu, but you can try it for yourself. If you go to our website, under About Vastu, one of the drop-down links is, Suzette, is it an exhibit or a book about Vastu?
It's the exhibit, John. It's an exhibit.
Okay, on our website, maharishivastu.com, go to Learn About Vastu and then click on Exhibit. And on, I think, page 6 is a little tiny drawing that illustrates where some of the key locations are for the homes. I don't have many illustrations in this webinar because it's a little bit kludgy for me to bring up illustrations, and I didn't want to overly interrupt the flow of this first webinar, but you can find that diagram on our website. Do we have any questions on this subject?
No, John, go ahead with the next section.
Okay, you bet. And now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And as I said, doing so slightly interrupts the flow. But here we are. The third of the 5 elements that bring harmony to Maharishi Vastu homes is proportion, measurement, and dimensions. As we see in this example, and Susan, does this fill the frame?
No.
Okay, all right, let's make it big.
That's better.
Okay. If I select the setting for fill screen, then it hides my other controls, so I can't do that. So we'll settle for this. There's harmony in the proportions of the beautiful structures of nature, be they seashells, such as we're looking at right now, or the human body, or, for instance, feathers. And if our house has the right dimensions, the right proportions, there will be a resonating quality in it that will nourish us. The Vedic formulas take into consideration, among other factors, the relationship of the homeowner with the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, to ensure a perfect resonance between the cosmic structure and our individual structure and all of the components of the house. And without these mathematical formulas, there is no complete Vastu. And let's look at another related aspect of this. Symmetry, specifically bilateral symmetry, the kind which we see displayed in the human form and in this example in a monarch butterfly. It's a visual expression of balance. It's an element of Vastu, and the eye quickly recognizes its settling influence. And so throughout history, around the world, in many, perhaps all cultures, there has been a tendency to build symmetrical buildings, building with bilateral symmetry, as we see in this example, lower right, by the famous Italian Renaissance architect, Andreas Palladio. We're looking at Villa Imo. So, any questions about this area of the 5 elements?
No. I did want to say, though, that that diagram that you were referring to for room placement is actually directly on our website, John. And it's under the About Vastu tab. The first thing that in the pull down menu is what is Vastu, and it gives the brief summary of what you've been talking about: right direction, right placement. If you click on the right placement, it will show that particular diagram.
Great, thank you. So let's go on to the next one of the 5 elements of a Vastu home that create harmony. And this is, if we want to say that the earlier things we've been talking about are a little bit esoteric, not the sort of thing that people normally consider, this next subject is the opposite. It is so widely accepted that when it is absent, it has a health effect on us, which is recognized by medical science. And this is the effect of the materials of which a house is made. The effect when materials harm us is called sick building syndrome. And it's what doctors describe it as when our homes make us sick. Sadly, chemical sensitivity is more and more common today. And so the solution is very obvious. It's just use natural and non-toxic materials when we build a house and make sure there's plenty of fresh air. Cross ventilation is an ideal, weather permitting. So as a baseline for feeling harmony, we should feel health, good health. And a key to always having good health in our home is to make sure that we build of natural and non-toxic materials. And this is completely common sense, but trust me as an architect, architects and builders under the pressure of getting the next project done can fail to give this enough emphasis. But when we build Maharishi Vastu buildings, we make sure never to lose sight of this imperative. Susan, do we have any questions about the subject of materials?
Yes, we do, actually. One is, what is the relationship, or, you know, the complementary relationship between passive house design and Maharishi Vastu? Are they compatible? Another question that was asked was about comparing to permaculture. So
Beautiful.
maybe you'd like to do those
Sure.
two together.
Those of you who are not familiar with the term passive house, which is a pretty new term, and while its origins were in the US and Canada, it as a discipline and as a term was developed in Germany about 20 years ago, and then exported back to the United States and Canada. And what it referred to in its purest original sense was that a house would be so energy efficient, that is so well insulated with such good windows and so tight, having so little infiltration, that it wouldn't need a heating system or a cooling system because it wouldn't heat up in the summer or cool in the winter. Well, here in the United States, our extremes of temperature are greater than they are in Europe. And so what passive house means in practice in the US is a little more liberal than that. But what it entails typically, I'm getting a little over technical here, but if you build a house very tightly so that it's not leaking air and heat or cooling out to the outside, then you have to bring in fresh air. And so such a house will have what's called a heat recovery ventilator, a little system that just supplies enough fresh air to meet our requirements, but that air is all capturing the outgoing heat, or 90% of it, so that it's not so energy inefficient. And in passive house design in the United States, the goal is that the only heating that you need is the heating that you might add to the small amount of fresh air that's used in a heat recovery ventilator, because the house is so well insulated and has such good windows and is so tight. Well, the answer to the question now is absolutely we can and have, in fact, built buildings, quite a few buildings, 12 to my count, that meet the passive house standard. Maharishi Vastu buildings, we are doing it. So it absolutely can be done. There's a longer conversation to be had about how much fresh air is enough fresh air. We promote more fresh air than is the minimum required in the passive house standard. And we have some ideas about how to get it into the house so that it doesn't have to pass through a long system of ducts. But that's a technical subject that I won't go into right now. And the second question was, how about the system of permaculture? And this is a system I'm not quite as able to provide a very accurate definition of it off the cuff on this call, but in general terms, it is thinking of a house as not being separate from nature, that a house should be fully integrated into the web of nature, and all of our human interventions that might be a part of building a house and having a yard and having gardens should be fully taking advantage of laws of nature, of the local environment. And so the house that I live in, that I built for myself, this Vastu house, absolutely intentionally includes permaculture principles. One principle is that when you garden, you want to have those products of the garden that you use most frequently, which are your herbs, right next to the front door. And then the products of the garden that you use a little less often, a little further out, and a little further out for, say, the orchard, which you only actually use very, very seasonally. And so I've done all the gardening, my wife and I, in our yard according to these permaculture principles. And I have a client who is building a permaculture community in Southern Europe. And it's also, of course, a Maharishi Vastu community, and it will also be a passive house community. And so we are in the process of beginning to design buildings that will use all three of these systems. So that's the long answer. And the short answer is that they are very, very compatible and supportive of each other.
Good. Now, there's two questions that have come in regarding methods for EMF reduction and dirty electricity.
Beautiful.
And how to protect against,
Yes.
how to protect against these things.
And I have not mentioned this subject, and I'll give a very brief answer, and maybe we will have a webinar in which we can really stretch out and talk about these subjects at length. But we are in the subset of elements that we call materials, and the electrical system in a house is a part of the materials of which a house is made. So what is this acronym EMF? It stands for electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic frequency, and it has been established for 40 years or more as a result of thousands of medical studies, many pioneered by the US government, that electrical radiation radiated off of electrical wires interacts with human physiology. It interacts on the cellular level and can alter cellular functioning. And under certain circumstances, with a high enough dose of electromagnetic radiation, systems and organs of the body can be significantly impaired. And some people clearly have heightened sensitivity. I'm seeing a little message. Let me read it. Excuse me, I'm going to slip my glasses on.
John, I can take care of it.
Okay. It was popping up on my screen for the first time, and I was distracted by it. So there is a percentage of the population, which we estimate at maybe 5 or 10%, who have a heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. And for them, life is very difficult, because if you're in a building, there is electromagnetic radiation. If you're on a cell phone, you're exposing yourself to it. So there are certain protocols that we take in the design of Maharishi Vastu buildings to greatly reduce EMF, or electromagnetic frequency. And the actual technical solutions I could spend 5 minutes on, and that's not the primary purpose of this call. So I will simply say that for complete health, we want to manage that risk as well as any other potential hazard in conventional construction.
Okay, in this area again, what is the best, I think they're saying insulation and the best natural heating system and heating and cooling system?
Well, these are questions which the answers to which differ depending upon where you're building, what your climate is, and what the materials are that are available, usable, and even economical in your region. We recommend natural insulating materials, and the very best kind of a wall is a wall that is thick, solid, vapor permeable, but self-insulating. Now, what kind of material might that be? Well, one example is a solid wood wall, what is often called a log wall. Now, log construction can have its own problems. It can be very leaky. It can have a certain look that may not be appropriate. But that is simply an example of a wall which is itself insulating without adding any synthetic materials and which has mass. There are industrially made construction materials made of block with different names in different parts of the world. Some made of Portland cement, some made of completely natural materials that laid up as masonry can provide the same quality. There are almost every traditional way of building in climates far from the equator where heating is needed incorporate thick walls with insulation in them. And many of them, if they don't create, for instance, mold problems, are very, very suitable. So that's a wide open answer. And we have built Maharishi Vastu houses using almost every kind of natural insulating material that you could name.
John, did you mention the natural heating and cooling systems?
No, I didn't, and that's a great question. Much of the world doesn't, and much of the population of the world doesn't need cooling. Much of the United States does, and that's another subject, but most of the world, some heating is needed. What we recommend is not forced air, not blowing air coming out of ducts, but rather that some surface is warm and that warm surface radiates heat into the interior of the house. An example of this is hot water radiators. Another example, which is done in Europe, but really not in the United States, is to have small hot water pipes in a plastered wall. A possibility, maybe it's not the most ideal, but it's fairly common in the US, is to have hot water heating in a floor. And what I want to point out, though, is we would not recommend this kind of heating if the actual medium moving through the house heating is electricity, if it's electrical wires that are heating up, providing the heat, because they would generate quite a bit of electromagnetic radiation.
And what about hot water baseboard heating?
Yes, any kind of hot water radiators, including baseboards, are a terrific solution, and they're widely used traditionally around the world.
Okay, I think I'm going to go to a couple of the questions that had come in previously that are kind of more general. If you feel like you, what is the significance of the plinth around the house, John?
I will answer that question, but maybe I'll just hold it and I'll finish the 5 elements.
Good idea.
We're getting near 1 hour, and some people may want to just take an hour with us. So let's first, before we talk about the plinth, talk about the 5th of the 5 elements,
Right.
which is another thing that has an influence on the quality of life in a home or in a building is what surrounds it, the site, the surroundings. And we want to build where nature will support a harmonious home. And so, as I've already explained, for instance, we wouldn't want to build on a site where there's a hill to the east of it. And as I mentioned, this is why we always encourage our clients to be in touch with us before they purchase a lot, so that we can guide them to buy a lot that will be completely nourishing. And so, in summary, these are the 5 ways that Maharishi Vastu can bring harmony to our homes. The first is right orientation of the home, and secondarily of our own actions in the home, major activities. Second is right placement, that is what we put where in the home. The third is right proportions or measurements or dimensions of the home in harmony with natural law. The fourth is using natural and non-toxic materials. And the fifth is the surroundings. And there's a whole hour that we could spend talking about ways in which the surroundings have an effect upon us, but it's common sense, and I don't think it needs any amplification. So when we incorporate these 5 elements to produce harmony, yes, they do, anecdotally and statistically, we can say with confidence, enliven in occupants' lives the qualities of good health, of happiness, of family harmony, of success, of growth to enlightenment. But those are just symptoms of something deeper that Vastu does. What it does is it aligns our individual intelligence with what we could call cosmic intelligence, with that field of intelligence that orders all of the cosmos. And when that is done, there is less suffering, we make wiser choices, and in many measurements, life becomes more successful and more harmonious. Now, I think I'll do one last thing before we take the last questions, which is that I'm going to share with you where to turn for more information. I'm going to do a little clicking here, and then I'll call it up. You already know our website, maharishivastu.org. And there are 3 good books on this subject. The first is this very small but very potent book, Building for the Health and Happiness of Everyone. Every word in this is worthy of being memorized, as I, in fact, have done. And it is available from Maharishi University of Management in Fairfield, Iowa. Very easy URL, mumpress.com. mumpress.com. You can order Building for the Health and Happiness of Everyone. So this is the manual. But for those who want a larger book with much more information, then what we recommend is Vastu Homes and Cities, which is available from Amazon.com. It's a terrific book, and periodically it undergoes new enlarged editions with more and more information on it. And some of you on this call may be developers, or you may know developers. And so we have the right book for any developer, which is this. It's called Enlightened Real Estate, Transforming Ourselves and the World Around Us. And it's written by Barry B. Shear with 1 chapter by myself. And it also is available on Amazon. I recommend it to anyone. It's a good read, but it's especially important for developers so that they can understand just what they need to do to bring enlightenment to their clients and to the world. So with that, Susan, I will answer your last question that you asked me a minute ago, which was, there's a particular part of a building that one of our listeners has heard of called a plinth, and what is it and what is its significance? Well, it is correct that Maharishi Vastu buildings and any Sthapatya building is composed of certain elements horizontally from the bottom going up to the top. The bottom element is by no means unique to Maharishi Vastu. We can call it a plinth, and what that simply means is it's a platform on which the walls of the house sit. And ideally and traditionally, it's a solid platform made out of stone, and the top of it is actually the floor of the house. Today, we often build in different ways. We may not have a stone foundation underneath the entirety of the house, but this and a particular outside profile of it, according to Vedic proportions and dimensions, is what we refer to as a plinth.
Actually, John, I have one more question, 2 questions that are actually the same. And it has to do with let me just pull up the general, more general question. Do the rules of orientation and also placement change depending on which side of the equator I'm building on?
It's a very astute question. And the answer is no, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west throughout the world, whether we're north of the equator or south of the equator. And the intelligence of the sun, the organizing intelligence of the sun, the differing qualities of the sun's energy over the course of the day are the same everywhere on the earth. And that is the answer.
So the same rules are applicable for room placement in the north and the south hemispheres, yes?
Correct.
Okay, and one more question. People can obviously leave if they'd like to, but we've had this question come up a number of times. How can one become trained in Vastu building or consulting?
And the answer to that is, first of all, it's a really blissful thing to get this information. This is the crown jewel, the real prize of architecture, of building design. And I am eternally grateful that I, through great good fortune, stumbled into learning this. And when I did, and I saw the dramatic effects that it was having upon my clients and people just in their homes, I gave up my prior practice completely. I walked away from projects, and from that point on, I've done only Vastu. So I applaud anyone who wants training in Vastu. The training is primarily restricted to people who are architects, because it is architects around the world who mainly design buildings. And if you are an architect, there are a couple of additional requirements. You have to have learned the transcendental meditation technique and certain advanced programs of the TM technique generally. In some cases, people who are not precisely an architect but have some very closely related skills might also be able to take this training. And it's done typically as mid-career training for people sometime after they have graduated from architecture school. I was in my 40s when I took the training. And the bulk of the training occurs in a very intensive 2-month in-residence course, which is offered every few years. And the next one is actually coming up this
August.
Early autumn, yeah. So if you qualify and you're interested and you want to start the training in August, let us know right away.
John, I think because this person specifically talked about building and constructing, we should also mention that there is a course for builders, which does not give them the training that a Vastu architect would have, but it definitely, you can talk more about that because you are part of that course.
Sure. It's a much shorter course. It's not exactly as Susan said, it doesn't unpack so much the rules regarding how to design a Vastu house, but it completely orients you to those rules so that you're familiar with them and you know how to apply them. And then it also works with you in understanding for natural and non-toxic construction and how to get plenty of fresh air while making environmentally responsible and economical choices. And that course,
it's available online, actually.
Okay, great. Is it through MUM right now? Do you know?
No, that one is not. That one is, if someone wants to have more details on that, they can email me at info@maharishivastu.org. It's given through one of our international websites. So that would be the place. I also wanted to mention, I think it might be worthwhile to mention here, if anyone is a builder or in the contracting field, we are in the process of setting up qualification guidelines and training, basically, for builders specifically, as the need comes up in various areas around the country, to be qualified and certified as builders of Maharishi Vastu.
And the idea behind this program is that we are often contacted by people who want a home in some part of the United States, maybe New Jersey, maybe California, etc. And they would like us to provide everything they need. They'd like a design, they'd like a builder, they'd like a piece of land. And if there are builders who are well qualified and really want to build Vastu, we can pre-qualify them, and then we can match them up with prospective clients in their area who want to build Vastu. That's a great program, Susan. I'm glad you mentioned it, and it may apply to some of the builders who are on this call. And I also want to mention on the prior topic that there is a continuing education course available through mum.edu, several hours long for more information about Maharishi Vastu. It covers much of the information in these webinars, but for some, it's a convenient way to obtain the information.
Okay, I think we're done.
Lovely.